Hi everybody and welcome once again to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James Swagger and I'm delighted to be on my second show today. I just had a fascinating first show and my second show is even more interesting. It's my favourite subject. We're going to be talking about the lost continent of Mu. Whether you talk Mu or Atlantis, you have my attention. And we're going to be talking to Jack Churchwood. And he's also going to be talking about James Churchwood, who originally authored the book. And Jack has republished it and has been a fellow researcher and carried the flag, as they say. And the book I'm going to be talking about today is Lifting the Veil on the Lost Continent of Mu, the Motherland of Men. And it looks absolutely fascinating. It looks very scholarly. And it looks it looks at the whole history and paradigm that we've been given, and it ties in several threads together. Let me just tell you a bit about James Churchwood. In the 1920s, he wrote a series of groundbreaking books about the lost continent of Lemuria, which he called the land of Mu, M-U, for those not familiar. And the basic premise is that the Garden of Eden was not in Asia. And we're going to leave it at that because James is going to tell us, or Jack is going to tell us himself. And without further ado, let's bring on our guest for today. Welcome to Capricorn Radio, Jack.
Good afternoon.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here, Jack. And forgive me, I could easily mix up a Jack and a James. I'm a James myself, so...
no problem.
But Jack, your grandfather has wrote this book in the 1920s. I guess, give us a double biography, because this is a story of two people, really, Jack. Tell us about James and tell us about you growing up, knowing about your grandfather, and inevitably tell us about you too, and kind of tie into both biographies in a way, Jack.
Okay. I was born and raised in Clearwater, Florida, but my great-grandfather was born in Devonshire, England in 1851 and subsequently traveled to the Sri Lanka, where he was a tea planter. And in his books, he writes that he was doing famine relief duty and met a rishi of a temple there and was examining some of the glyphs and symbols that were on the side of the temple. And eventually he became friends with the rishi, and the rishi started to teach him more about the symbols and their meanings and whatnot. And after about 2 years, according to James, of being taught the symbols, the rishi finally mentioned that he had some ancient tablets. And he mentioned that the rishi said that these tablets were from the Nikal Brotherhood, which was they kept the information and wisdom of the people of the lost continent of Mu since its inception 200,000 years earlier. And James went through the tablets and tried to decipher them, and eventually James wrapped them all back up and repaired them as best he could, and they put them away. And I guess James, when he came back to the United States, fulfilled his duty as an engineer and whatnot, and gained access to a large amount of funds after he sued a steel company for patent infringement. And this was in the early teens, 1914 or so. And so past that, he was able to his investigation of the Nikal Brotherhood, the legends of the lost continent of Mu. I believe that's when he started putting everything back together, and that became the nucleus for his books, The Lost Continent of Mu, Children of Mu, and Cosmic Forces of Mu, and Sacred Symbols of Mu, and all his fun books that he wrote.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to get into Nikal because I know Klaus Donner was involved and stuff, and I had Klaus on the show quite recently, Jack. But you growing up with your great grandfather, then, Jack, obviously just because you're related to him doesn't mean you're going to have an interest. So you obviously have an interest in this stuff too, Jack. So, I mean, tell us about you. I mean, did you see this guy as a pioneer, as a giant of the time? Was it nice to have him in the family history? Was it, were you encouraged or?
Actually, it was a little different in my house. My great-grandfather was estranged from my great-grandmother, and my father actually spent summers with my great-grandmother and obviously his father. They lived in the same house, and he was conditioned to believe that everything my great-grandfather wrote was poppycock, as he would say. And whenever his name was mentioned in the house, when I was a young child and people would come up and ask me about his books, I'd come and ask my dad and say, "What do you think? What are they talking about?" And he'd look at me and say, "They're talking about foolishness. Don't worry about it. Just stay away from it." And in fact, one story he told me is that when some socialites in the neighborhood found out who his grandfather was, invited him over to this beautiful party, a lawn party back then in the 50s, I believe. And they had it catered, and everybody was in their finery, and they had chauffeurs dropping people off. My father walked down in his shorts and his T-shirt and his flip-flops, and when they finally asked him, he shook hands and said hi, and when they finally asked him, he said what he thought of it, and he finally told them the truth. He thought it was all baloney, but he probably used a different term. And they were not too happy with him, and I don't think anybody spoke to him any further, and they actually probably never asked him to come back again. So as far as I was raised as a skeptic. But from all the questions I've been asked and all the interactions I've had with people and things I've seen, I can't just throw it all out. And so that's what caused me to start researching what my grandfather wrote about, researching his life and his theories.
Wow, that's so interesting, Jack. That's so interesting because you would naturally think we have this ideal, picture when you don't know about somebody, what you think that person will be like, or and you could probably forgive me for thinking that, but I suppose that kind of gave you a more thorough, more academic approach to this, or a more specific approach that kind of helped you probably better than it might have been a burden to be encouraged to research this and to be, maybe if your great grandfather was idolized for this great research that he did, you might have been impaired in a way, is what I'm trying to say, Jack.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no problem with that with me. I'm undertaking it due to the questions I've been asked and the things I've seen that are not explained with the I have an engineering degree, and not everything that I took in engineering is actually explained, or the things I've seen is not explained by my engineering degree, I should say.
Well, I'm a fellow engineer too, Jack, and this is why I actually do the show, because I look into ancient history, and this is what I like about engineers, by the way, Jack. So we're among friends here today, and I have had a few fellow engineers on the show that are also authors of history and that. But the point is that, as an engineer, you're a problem solver. Yeah, you agree with that? And
absolutely, that's what the definition is, right?
Yeah, exactly. So when you, I think these are the people we need to look at ancient history, Jack, because you never know what you're going to see. And I go to a lot of ancient sites, Jack, and you'll probably agree with this, that you'll probably go and see something that the historian doesn't see, or you'll see something that the Egyptologist doesn't see, or you see something that the Mayanologist doesn't see, or because your thought process is elevated that way. Yes, engineers are creative, and yes, engineers build things, but they're also problem solvers, and that's the core body of it. And unless you're in the field, you don't realize that. So yeah, I can kind of gel with you on that, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I guess then, just for the listeners, Jack, the big one is then just to give us a premise for the Lost Continent of Mu. I mean, from its background, its location, or
Well, as my great-grandfather wrote, after discovering these tablets in India in late 1860s, it told the story of a lost Pacific Ocean continent that was 200,000 years or more older, and that the people had developed a high level of civilization, and they had colonized the earth. And essentially that was the Garden of Eden, that all their technologies and their civilization and everything came from there. And that's what James pinned it back to. And the Lost Continent of Mu, Motherland of Men, was his attempt to prove that. And most of the volume provides examples of what he considered proof of a master ancient civilization from which everything else sprung.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So do you think then that Atlantis was in the Atlantic and that Mu was in the Pacific, and they were both sunken continents, or do you perhaps think that one is the other, or other one? It's some people go, I don't like Mu because I think Atlantis was the sunken continent, and some people go, I don't like Atlantis, I think it was Mu, and they look at specific evidence for both. Do you think it's probably both are right and both were sunken land masses, or do you think one or the other?
Well, as my great-grandfather wrote, he mentioned that Atlantis was a colony of Mu, and that when they went through the Great Inland Sea through the middle of South America, that's how they got to Atlantis. There was, he shows in his books, The Children of Mu, the eastern and western routes of migration and colonization, and Atlantis was a colony of Mu, and it sunk under the same cataclysm that took down Mu, as my great-grandfather wrote.
Sure. These Nicals are plates. These are incredibly important. I suppose, tell us because Klaus Donna really likes these things as well, doesn't he? He gets quite excited with these Nical tablets. Tell us where you're involved. You've been involved with Klaus, haven't you?
Yes, I have. I interacted with him a while ago when.
Tell us a little bit about that, Jack.
Well, he wrote that a German friend of his, a travel guide that was making trips to India, had written an article, and in the article he stated that he had seen the Nical tablets, or he knew where they were and had pictures of them, and he sent those pictures to me.
Wow.
And I don't want to rain on anybody's parade and be decisive or divisive, but the fact is that the metallic plate he provided pictures of is actually in a Beirut, Lebanon museum, and its text has never been translated. And the other ones he showed were some rock tablets that he showed were Tamil, and they had nothing to do with the Nical Brotherhood or the Nical tablets.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, why are they in the Lebanon Museum then?
They were found in Lebanon. They're not from. They weren't they're not the Nical tablets, or they weren't, or they're not.
But are they in writing for that region? Are they in that type of script?
Well, the particular script that is on there, I don't believe has been deciphered yet.
Yeah. I got you. Wow. I think the beauty about Mu or Atlantis, or both, as your great-grandfather said, is that like this idea of a sunken landmass, whether that's one or two or both, this really ties in all this global evidence, Jack. These global threads of evidence where you see similarities popping up in all sorts of cultures. Is that the way you see it? You see all this, you see that as the main question mark, that everything can be answered when you bring in a lost continent.
I'm not convinced. I'm like I mentioned previously, I'm still researching his works to determine the veracity of them. I understand that there are similarities between peoples, and it would be nice to have proof positive, and I'm not sure that has been shown 100%. I know there's circumstantial evidence, but That doesn't prove anything in a court of law, according to what I've heard.
Hmm. Hmm. Have you ever been to Devonshire, by the way, just out of curiosity?
Negative.
No. Oh, yeah, I used to live there, by the way. I used to live in Devon. It's a beautiful part of the world. Absolutely beautiful. Um, a lot of authors and stuff live there, by the way. So
Well, I'd love to go, and
yeah.
hopefully that's in the cards someday.
Yeah, rich in megaliths and rich in culture and rich in from music to arts to creativity. Seemingly people flock there, So
Well,
strange, strange that your great grandfather left there, and that's what it become like. So
our ancestral home in Stoke Gabriel, it's called Hill House. Before it was sold last century by Charlie Churchward, it was I believe, the oldest private home in Britain.
wow,
We've got documents that show that the land and the property was from the 14 something or other, 1420 something.
wow. Are you from a big family then, Jack? Is there anybody else in the family takes an interest in your great grandfather's work, or is it just you?
It's just me. I'm the other than my son,
Hmm.
who's in India right now studying
Wow,
at a monastery. I'm the last remaining churchward
wow.
of this particular line. There are other churchwards, but
That's nice.
they're not descended from James.
Wow. Oh, so interesting. Do you see it as important for you then to understand this lost continent of Mu, or do you see there's a sort of importance for? I personally see anybody who's researching history today of ancient cultures, and especially engineers or astronomers or whoever. Do you see this as important to getting to the truth of history and humanity?
Well, I think it's very important to make sure that you get the history down right and that you provide facts rather than sometimes uh, wild postulations or you're reaching for straws sometimes. Sometimes they reach for straws, and what is stated doesn't follow what the conclusion is.
Hmm. Hmm.
I've noticed that about a lot of political writing as well, and
Oh yeah, more so, yeah.
it is.
Yeah. See, your grandfather talked about the biblical Eden was in the specific, like he literally, the Garden of Eden was in the Pacific Ocean, not in Asia as we think it is. I think that's the biggest point to make of all. But I think people would like to think that they have it narrowed down, Jack. But I don't see the evidence for narrowing it down. By the way, in Asia, I think a lot of fanciful and people trying to tie it together. Um, what records do we have of it being in like Pacific or of any?
Well, James had quite a few different examples that he had of Mu. He'd mentioned all the megalithic
Structures, yeah.
structures that are found in the Pacific, like Nan Madol, and he mentioned there are some on Hawaii.
Like Padang as well, the Kun Padang, and then there's all the dolmens in Korea. I've been invited to go to Korea as well, funny enough, Jack. But yeah, people don't realize that Indonesia and Asia is riddled with the stuff, like riddled with it.
Absolutely.
Nan Madol, I mean, there's a place there now. I mean, I've had an author on talking about Nan Madol before. A few people have touched on this, and I mean, Nan Madol is like, it's like the smoking gun, if you ask me, Jack.
Well, it would be unless if you disregard the oral traditions of the people that live there and the archaeological evidence that indicates that these were built within the last 1,000 years. I understand that people are a little amazed that they can bring these enormous basalt crystals, but they've actually found the basalt crystals on the other side of the island, and I believe I've seen a couple of TV shows that indicated that they were able to, present day, take one of these enormous basalt crystals and put it in one of their little reed boats and bring it over there.
Really? I haven't seen that. That's interesting. It is incredibly massive structure, though. Whether the antiquity of it is in question or not, I mean, the sheer size. This is a man-made. Just for the listeners, for the way, Jack, Nam Madal is literally like a man-made structure. It's actually like an island. It's like an island of basalt. It goes under the ocean as well as above it. And they're basically like railway sleepers made out of bits of stone, basalt stone, all stacked on top of each other. Like, but massive, like nearly as big as the pyramid, if not bigger, in volume, I think.
It's quite large.
Mm. You know, wow, still a lot of work to do by reed boats, though, Jack.
Mm-hmm. It probably took them a long time.
Wow, for sure. You know, I hadn't heard about that as a recent structure, though. I haven't really heard that. I know there's a lot of mythology about it being possessed by entities, and they won't go over there at night time or stay over on the island and stuff. Like, you know, it's like one of the most remote places on the planet, like, and French Polynesia. But fascinating place, though. Fascinating place. What records do we have of Mew, then? Talk to me about some of the records that we got, Jack.
Well, James mentions quite a bit in his books, and he provides like 21 specific references of the South Sea island ruins that he discovered. Easter Island, Tonga Tebu, which he puts in his, he made a picture of some of the standing stones there. He mentions Uxmal in the Yucatan, and he mentions several of the Mayan ruins as being from Mu, and Burma, the Cook Islands, the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, the Caroline Group, and Pohnpei is one of his big examples and used by quite a few people.
Mm. Wow. He also writes about the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the sacred volume and stuff, and I guess that's one big one for me because I researched into Egypt a lot, and I've had a lot of Egyptologists on the show. But tell us where this fits in and what the importance of this is, Jack.
Well, James' interpretation of the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which was written on the side of walls in the tomb and also on papyri, James interpreted that to be a monument or a commemoration. His interpretation was that it was a commemoration of the lands to the west that had sunk. Because he noticed that there's two divisions in Egypt, that some of the people talk about the lands to the east and some talk about the lands to the west.
That's right, yeah.
And his interpretation was, well, the ones from the east, the lands of the east, those are the people that came from Mu, and directly through India and the Levant and whatnot. And on the other side, the lands from the west, these are the people that came through the inland sea in South America and stopped off at Atlantis and then entered the Mediterranean Sea and continued on to Egypt. He believed there was two different instances of migration, colonization.
Sure. I mean, the Egyptians themselves, I mean, when you read the Plato's account of Atlantis, they talk about, which he got from the Egyptians, and maybe he gave the name Atlantis, you know, but no, they could have been talking about two continents or one. He maybe just slapped a label on it as Atlantis. And do you think then that, like, these guys were talking about the motherland of men in general, and Plato maybe just put Atlantis on it, and because a lot of people kind of run with the Atlantis team and then they don't really know what Mu is, whereas, you know, the Egyptians could have been talking about, you know, as you say, like the east and the west, like these two homelands.
Well, I believe that if you look at the Egyptian account, they might not have gone back as far in time as James did, and so the fact that there is a people that lived on Atlantis, they might not have been aware that there was people from Mu, and that the Mu was the original place where those people came from.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow. Are you familiar with the Chumash art in the painted caves in Santa Barbara, that far west?
Negative.
Wow, because I just happened to know about this, and when I read the book, I got to Mu, the Empire of the Sun, chapter 6, and as soon as I opened it, I went, "Oh my God!" Because I've been studying rock art and cave art. It's just a little hobby I have. Don't think I'll ever write a book on it, but I love ancient cave art and the art of the Chumash painted cave in Santa Barbara in California. It's exactly like what's in your father's book, or sorry, your great grandfather's book. The circle with the star or the sun inside it, with the 8 points on it, which is also similar to megalithic art in Ireland, but the Empire of the Sun, I suppose, let's bring in the symbology then and the symbols that the Empire of the Sun is, that, this is a common source. And I just think that it's beautifully located. Again, there's so many examples of this, Jack, though. There's so many examples of these little pieces of art that are separated in time and separated in history and separated in geographics that all tie in with a common source. But, we're not allowed to think like that in a way, Jack. You're not allowed to think. Mainstream academia does not let you think that we all had a common source. So, of course, we have to dismiss it. But I just think it's so fitting that it's in California.
Well, according to the individuals, Mr. Cervais, in his book Lemuria, the lost continent of he believed, he also in there mentions that the lost continent of Lemuria was, the original records refer to it as Mu. But in that book, James never mentioned Lemuria, and he never mentioned Mr. Cervais' work. But in that book, they mention that the continent of Lemuria bashed up against California. And the ensuing mountains between the two of them is a dividing line, and what's west of that is what the remains of Lemuria, and to the right it's it's America. So as according to Cervais, maybe those are from the lost continent of Lemuria, as he mentioned.
Well, I think the art has been dated. Don't ask me how they've dated this, by the way. It could be just pulled out of a hat, but I think it's 6,000 years old. But that kind of leads into the next question then. What time frame? I know James has talked a lot about geological time frames, and Mu, give us a time frame on what James thinks, and give us a time frame on what you think, or do you agree?
Well, he mentioned 12 to 14,000 years ago. It varies among where you find his work. But that more or less corresponds to the end of the last ice age.
Yeah.
And that could... And there are so many variables in there that we don't really know what land was above the sea, or if the conditions are correct or proper to allow individuals, scientists, researchers to discover anything from those ruins, or if there was anything there.
Wow. Yeah, it's such an important time on our planet as well, Jack. Such an important time. I mean, so much animals got wiped out, the melting ice sheets. We pretty much have a geological understanding of what happened. There was a flood. There was cataclysms on the earth. Animals were dying off. That was an important time frame for our history of our planet. If it's kind of funny that, your great-grandfather, as well as Plato, as well as anybody else, they seem to have picked a time that really, really, really fits, Jack.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you couldn't guess it better, really, is what I'm trying to say, Jack.
Well, I'm not sure what... like I said, I'm still researching and trying to find the answers. And I can't come out and say
for sure
anything exactly, but I'm still working on it.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's the way to be, I suppose, to be thorough, Let's talk about some of the symbols, Jack. I mean, there's a lot of symbols used across the planet. I mean, the Dogon, they use the same sun wheel as the ancient Egyptians, and these sun wheels are typical of some of the stuff that your great grandfather goes into. But that's just one example. I mean, um, do you see these symbols as an important piece of evidence then?
Well, what I've attempted to do in my research is to go through individually his books, and the first one is done. The second one is to the printer, the Stone Tablets of Mu, it's tentatively called, and contains his 1927 book on the tablets that he obtained copies of from William Niven, that showed ancient buried cities in Mexico City. His subsequent books, like The Children of Mu, I'm going to eventually get into that, and the symbols. I have yet to really look at the symbols, other than attempt to compare them to some things that have been found in archaeological digs and whatnot, and see if there is any correlation between them. But as far as a deep study of his symbols, no, I'm not there yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, tell us about how North America fits into all this then, because North America, as far as anyone, I mean, as far as anyone in the modern world, we're only, up until about 20 years ago, we were only allowed to believe that Columbus discovered America and nothing happened before that. But that's not really the case, I suppose, Jack. But either from yourself or from James, I mean, tell us how North America fits into all this. These ancient civilizations are going back to Mu, like.
Well, as James mentioned, the colonists, I guess from the eastern, some of them went through the inland sea in South America and continued on to Africa and to Europe and to Atlantis. But some people went and colonized the Yucatan, colonized the North America. James believed that the cataclysms that he witnessed in Mr. Niven's articles when he wrote about the 2,000 tablets he found in the Valley of Mexico, James believed those were evidence of that as well. It showed proof positive. The petroglyphs that are spread out all across the North America are mentioned in his books as proof. And James believed that the people in North America were descended from the Mu, well, as everyone else is. And I believe that is one part of his books, that when you look at his theories and immediately dismiss that, no, there was no sunken continent, and no, I don't believe that. And as soon as you throw all that information out and dismiss it, the underlying theme that in the end James believed that there was we all actually had the same beginning, that we have a common ancestor, and that we all lived together in peace and harmony and were tolerant of each other for thousands of years. And somehow after the collapse of the civilization, savagery ensued.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
How do Native American Indians take to this? Do any of them indulge in this work, or do they have the same belief that they have? Do they talk about a lost land like Mu, or a common motherland, or anything like that?
Well, I have mentioned. James does mention that there are relatives. There are accounts in some of the tribes that indicate that these people did come from someplace else.
Wow.
I haven't engaged that entirely.
Sure. It would be very hard to prove as well. I mean, you'd have to do a lot of research for individual tribes and see commonality. And I know there is a lot of mythology. I don't like even use the word mythology myself, Jack, because one person's mythology is another person's history. But.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of common mythology stroke history among a lot of tribes in North America. I guess, tell us about the buried cities, the Mexican buried cities that Niven talked about, because this is important as well. And you'd already mentioned Mexico, so.
Well, James mentioned in the first book, in the 1926 Lost Continent of Mu, Motherland of Men, he devoted an entire chapter of the book, Buried Cities, Niven's Buried Mexican Cities.
Mm-hmm.
And he described, he actually included an article by William Niven in the book, and plus his own commentary and beliefs in it as well. But Niven had found throughout his excavations in Mexico, especially in the Valley of Mexico, he had found what he believed to be an enormous city with concrete walls that was so old that the wood that was used had been petrified.
Yeah.
And he had found examples of high technology, such as jewelers set up with an oven and all this, and it was the molds were extremely tiny, so they had an advanced civilization in that they were able to provide people the opportunity to sit down and do jewelry instead of food production or security or whatever.
Extracurricular to civilization, as we would think at that time, I suppose.
Yes. As well, he found, I believe, one location where there were hundreds of small statuettes that represented individuals that those people shouldn't have been able to know. They were African people and Indians from India, Indians and Chinese and all kinds of different peoples they found in one of the locations of one of the digs, all these little statues. So in addition to having a high level of civilization where they were allowed the opportunity to have free time, they also, it appeared, had commerce, because obviously they just didn't make up these people. If they look like, they obviously interacted with individuals that looked like that.
We also have the Olmec heads that have Negroid features as well, and so that's another anomaly as well of the Americas. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like, you know, if you have statues of foreign people, that, you know, these were commercial trading pieces as well as artistic expression, I suppose.
Quite possibly.
You know, the thing as well that you mentioned, the jewelers and the metallurgy, is, from what I gather, they were doing like platinum and gold jewelry, and platinum, as you know as an engineer, Jack, but for the listeners, it's such a high melting point. You know, it's like extremely hard to be working with platinum and gold together, and a lot of I think Ecuador has some stuff as well around the platinum and gold face masks and stuff. But that's the bit that I find fascinating, that we can use science today, Jack, to look into the past and scratch our heads at a high technology.
Well, all the big movements of rocks and things, I hate to reckon back to this, but for instance, the Crystal Palace we have here in Florida, where an individual from, I believe it was Lithuania, came and took these enormous blocks of stone and moved them all around. One story is that when he had to move it 10 miles down the road, he'd call in for the pickup, the tractor trailer to come in, and he'd ask them to take the night off, and in the morning when they came back, all these enormous rocks were on the tractor trailer.
Yeah, Leedskallen and Coral Castle, yeah.
Yes.
What a fascinating place that is. Fascinating story in terms of, and I guess this is probably similar to yourself, when you're researching a figure in history, you know, you might expect it this and you might expect that, but I think Leedskallen, he moved it because he first of all built that castle out of all these corals and stuff. He balanced all these stones that were, you know, precariously balanced and you know, weighing many tons, like, and he was a tiny guy. He was only like 5 foot, if that, and from, I think, Lithuania, as you say, he was a tiny little man. He couldn't have lifted very much weight, never mind the many tons that these stones are. But I think he built it for his girlfriend Agnes, who stood him up or something, and then he ended up moving the place. And like you say, he brought a truck in, told the truck driver to go, and moved the whole place many miles. But what a fascinating story that is too, Jack. Like,
Well, and in addition to that, there's an individual in, I believe, Wisconsin, who
wow,
has also showed that he is able to move enormous 2, 3, 4, 5 ton blocks all by himself
wow, really,
and set them up upright and move them and whatnot.
wow, that's so fascinating. I'll have to look into this. I hadn't heard that before. Um, Yeah, your great grandfather talks about the Yucatan and how these guys were placed among ancient civilizations. And for me, I mean, the Yucatan is a special place because they think that was also the place where it killed the dinosaurs because there's a big giant crater there. So I mean, this place is fascinating for many reasons. Like all within the pyramids as well and stuff like it's a geologically and historically and astronomy and stuff that's there. It's been fascinating for many eons. But tell us what your grandfather thought of the Yucatan. A great.
Well, he believed that it was obviously a colony, and he got that, I guess, from Augustus Le Plongeon, who believed that was the beginning. That was where civilization started, and I guess there were a few authors and researchers at the time that believed the same. But James believed that it was
Sure.
just a colony.
Yeah, this is the thing that you got to understand when you look at your great grandfather's work. That as you say, colony is the key word, Jack. Like that, these places are all colonies from a common source. The common source is gone now. This sunken landmass. Do you look into why that sunken landmass is gone? Do you?
Well, as far as when James placed it in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, I'm an engineer, and I really kind of believe what they're saying about plate tectonics, and find it a bit during the last 10, 12, 14,000 years, it would be on the scale of what James wrote. I believe that the lost continent of Mu was probably not in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Now, if you look at a different scale, that's possible that there's a sunken island. On a different scale, I mean, I'm not talking about the entire Pacific Ocean basin or a large part of it as he wrote. Or if you look at the subsidence of seawater during the last, at the end of the last ice age, that is another possibility.
Yeah.
That I subscribe to.
Mm-hmm.
But there's choices there. Unfortunately, I really can't subscribe to the fact that it was all the way through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the most fascinating things in the whole of the book is that your grandfather writes about the origin of savagery, and that savagery has come out of civilization, that man was created civilized first, and that being civilized, savagery came out of civilization. I quite understand that, and I don't just like that concept, I actually quite understand that. You look at what we're like today, more civilized, quote civilized that we have become, the more savage and barbaric, especially Western nations, not pointing out anybody in particular, Jack, but I mean, do you understand that philosophy? Do you see that was an important point of your great-grandfather's work?
I look at it from the point of view that his understanding is that the Creator made humans as a special creation and endowed them with special powers.
Mm-hmm.
These special powers got them through 200,000 years, according to James, and that one day everything dropped out from under them. And the only thing they didn't have what they needed to continue their existence, or they didn't believe they had what they needed to continue their existence, and thereupon they set upon their neighbor when they got hungry, and everyone was reduced to savagery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He talks about religion as well. Maybe just bring that in, and that the ancient religious philosophies or concepts or ideology, and how that affects man and stuff.
Well, James believed that the Nakal Brotherhood, who were the keepers of wisdom and knowledge, captured that religion, but their religion was different in that their religion completely fused with science. They believed that, well, their religion was science and their science was religion, and everyone was taught along those lines, as opposed to, and no one had any differences or disagreements, which also helped for people treating each other nicely and being tolerant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He also wrote about ancient sacred mysteries, rites, and ceremonies. You know, and that these are like incredibly important as well. And I think what you say is that these ceremonial rites, and religious and science, it was just one big circular wheel, Jack. That, you know, it was like one blended into the other. Like, but I mean, maybe talk about the rites and the ceremonies and how important that they were.
Well, James' discussion of those, I believe he understood that they were commemorations of the Mu, of their seed of civilization, the Garden of Eden, and these rites were to help remember that it existed, so that perhaps they could hearken back to it to a better time and eventually get back there as a species.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Unfortunately, it hasn't worked yet.
Totally, Jack. You know, that was my last question because we're coming to the top of the hour. I wanted to kind of touch it in where we are today with research into Mu. Now, I know, not taking away from you, Jack, I know you're looking at this, and I'm glad you have done, and you know, your great grandfather's work could have easily just been lay forgotten, I suppose, and it makes me wonder how many other authors that out there their work dwindles in a way. But I mean, is there anybody else carrying the flag for Mu research? Do you see this as important? Do you see this as something that, you know, we need to get more people on the case, like, and you?
Well, I'm not aware of other individuals who are studying it. I know there are some other individuals that are looking into it, and I don't know if I can out them or whatnot, because some people still consider it kook and fringe theories. But my thought is we're on the path, and it's possible for us to get back to where we were. And all this fighting and ridiculous intolerance of each other is counterintuitive, or it's counter to where we should be headed.
Counterproductive, counterintuitive, counter-humanitarian. I mean, that list goes on, Jack. I mean, for you, what would be the biggest area of research into Mu that we could focus on? I mean, whether that's, you know, as an engineer, one that we can get answers on, or one that you think is more philosophically better to look at? I mean,
in the recent talk I gave, I provided some thoughts, and the fact is that it would, first of all, if we could find the Nakal tablets, that would be great. But if we found them or identified some tablets as the Nakal tablets, how could we know how to decipher them without a member of the Nakal Brotherhood or a learned person that could decipher them for us? And then what would we do if those people still didn't want to be discovered? Because obviously if they were around and they wanted to be known, they could easily do that today. But if they didn't want to be found, how would we find one of them? And so we'd have to, and then again, if they didn't want to be found, if you decided you wanted to try to find them, if they didn't want to be found, I don't think you would be able to find them.
Sure.
So then it behooves me to look into what James wrote about his cosmic forces of Mu, which ties the science and religion together, and how he envisioned the universe worked. That, I believe, will be one of my things that I'll need to study in the future, so that I can understand the cosmic forces, and perhaps if I can understand them, maybe some of the Nakal tablets that have been shown, or some of the, I'll be able to understand them better.
Mm-hmm. Mhm. Wow, wow. I would love as an engineer as well, Jack, to get back to some of that ancient technology, that lost science, like as the engineer, obviously. I don't think we could ever get that. I think that's a bit fanciful. I mean, I think we could rediscover it in our own personal discoveries, but I mean, I don't think we're going to dig something up and go, oh, we know how to do this again. I don't.
Well, I'm right there with you. I understand that.
Yeah, yeah.
But if we can understand what he wrote in the Cosmic Forces, and I've tried to read it once or twice,
Hmm.
but my engineering brain just
Yeah.
kind of dismissed it all the first time, and I'm just going to have to take a different tact on it and try to understand what he is saying.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about engineers. They'll put it down, they'll go back and have another look at it, and they'll try a different approach. And I've dabbled in physics and science as well, and I think scientists struggle where engineers can excel, but and vice versa for that matter. Not to have a go at scientists. I think the thing to point out is that these guys, in the Lost Continent Mu or Atlantis or back in deep, deep antiquity, Jack, is that these guys had a much different philosophy, and they were all about knowledge and preserving knowledge and encouraging knowledge. And when things fell, like, and we've lost something very precious, I think, Jack.
Hmm.
But I guess the thing to finish on then is like, encourage you for what you're doing, and encourage the research, because we're getting an insight into something that probably would be forgotten about. But I think your great grandfather was onto something. I think he was a pioneer in this time, Jack. I think he really, really was a pioneer.
Well, a lot of people consider him that.
Yeah, I do. I certainly do from looking at the work. That, I mean, you got to understand at the time he wrote this book too, Jack. He would have stood out a mile. He would have stood out a mile. But he must have been like, he's on a par with me for Ignatius Donnelly, who wrote Atlantis in 1890, first edition.
Mm-hmm.
He was just a comparative of Ignatius Donnelly in a way, just writing about the other Atlantis, or the other continent, that of Mu. Tell me about you, Jack. Then, do you do many conferences? Have you anything to come up? Anything that you want to mention, or your website, and you have a YouTube channel as well, I think.
That's correct. My website, actually, to get to my links, if a link to my Facebook page, YouTube, my blogs and whatnot, it's j.churchward.com.
Oh, that's quite simple. Churchward.com. j.churchward.com. Oh, that's easy. Well, I'm gonna link that up on the YouTube channel and on the biography page as well for the listeners in the archives as well. And you have a conference coming up?
I hope to attend my publishers conference I believe it's in June or July, but I also have a conference coming up in September in Colorado at the Sunrise Ranch with the emissaries of Divine Light, and they're going to be doing a conference on Lemuria.
That sounds interesting. I think I know about that. A lady, because I've had two people stay with me from Colorado, and one of them mentioned that they have a conference up there. It's like a spiritual retreat on the edge of it's in a nice setting up there.
I haven't been there yet, but they tell me it's nice, and I've seen pictures, so it appears to be. But that'll be sometime in early September, I believe.
Well, the book is called Lifting the Veil on the Lost Continent of Mu, The Motherland of Men by Jack Churchward, and it's available at Ozark Mountain Publishing. Of course, you'll probably get it on Amazon and all the usual book dealers.
And if they go to my bookstore on my website, I have signed copies available.
Signed copies at jchurchward.com, yeah?
j.churchward.com, yes.
j.churchward.com, okay.
And there's a link to the bookstore there.
Wow, beautiful. I love signed copies myself, Jack. Like, if I can get a signed copy, that's the version I want.
Alrighty.
But, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and, keep up the research, Jack. Really do. It's like, I think your great-grandfather was, like I say, he's a pioneer and a titan of his day, and, he left a library of volumes there for people to, carry the flag, and I think it's sad that like it's kind of escaped a lot of people for so long. But I think we're in the right paradigm now, Jack.
Well, thank you for having me on, James.
Yeah,
and thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure, Jack.
Thank you very much.
Take care, brother.
Alrighty.
Bye now.